One of the things that Denise and I have struggled with is resting. And there's been a couple of times where we've gotten physically exhausted because we've been working a lot of hours. I think one of the things that we, well, let me speak mostly for me, that exhausted me the most, though, was not seeing the fruit that I expected. Over the last 4.5 years, 5 years, we've started about 12.5 churches, and we have 0 today. Every one of them has fizzled. And so all these visions and everything of what can happen and is happening in countless places isn't happening for us. And so one of the things that I wanted to talk about was this resting in God, and what that has looked like for us up to this point, what I'm learning, and that's ing there, about that. And I wish I had a few more minutes to actually have a nice presentation, but we're going to just kind of wander through this. There's actually 2 parts to this that I want to make sure that I get to. The first part is the rest part. And the rest part, I think that, certainly sleep and all that kind of stuff. Somebody, you quoted Psalm 127 a couple of times. What's like verse 4 or 5? What is it? See if I have that one memorized too.
So how blessed, I think it's 5 that you're talking about. How blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. No, that's not it.
Well,
Good.
that's a great verse, but for you young people.
It is in vain for you to rise up early, to retire late, to eat the bread of painful labors, for he gives to his beloved even in his sleep.
What's the verse in Mark 4 that we often quote? The 25-ish?
He lays down at night to sleep and rises in the day.
Yeah.
He knows not how what the earth produces all that stuff.
So he went out and he chunked the seed, but then he went to sleep. And then next thing you know, there's a harvest, right?
Yeah.
And so what's the verse that Jesus is talking about? His yoke is easy. What's that one?
Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me. For I am gentle, of humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
What in the world does that mean? What does it mean? Have you ever really thought about a what do they call it? When you got half a dozen oxen there, or I guess an even number. Yeah. So when you got this whole train of oxen that are pulling a heavy cart, and they're wearing these big old yokes, which is, I think, the picture that Jesus is talking about here. Have you ever really pondered what that looks like, what that feels like, what that is? I mean, what does it mean that Jesus' yoke is easy and his burden is light? This isn't a lecture, so this is a anybody?
Well, number one, the yoke is never for one animal. It's always for 2. And so if we take his yoke upon us, who's in the other side?
Anybody?
Jesus.
Trick question? Okay.
We're co-laborers with Christ.
Okay. So what does it look like? I mean, now that we've identified that picture, what does it look like to be yoked with Jesus? Let's ignore the half a dozen or dozen oxen. There's just 2 of you now. There's Jesus and you. Y'all are yoked together. You got this wood or iron or whatever it is thing, and you're now doing the harvest. You're doing the work of God together. What does that actually look like?
I think it looks like 2 Corinthians 9:8. He says, and God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work.
All times, all things, bound in every good work.
Or I think that's at least the result.
That's a result of it. And what does it look like second by second?
I think it looks like, being close enough to Jesus where you're doing what he's doing and you're saying what he's saying, you have his purposes. It's like, really kind of reminds me of John 15, where we're also just really in tune with his purposes and priorities, and, in step with him and what he's doing. It's like we're taking up his efforts ourselves. We're taking personal ownership and doing those with him.
Interesting.
I think of the yoke, you have to move at the same speed and you have to be there. So what you were saying, it's abiding or just remaining where Jesus is, at the place where he is, at the speed that he's going, not trying to go forward or holding back, but being in line and pace.
Interesting.
It's kind of like, Jesus said, I don't do anything except the Father tells me, I only do what he has told me to do. So I think it really, in my imagination, when I think about that, it's like nothing I do is going to be outside of what Jesus is telling me to do. Which I don't know if that's attainable or not. I mean, Jesus attained it obviously, but it's kind of a goal.
So ignoring the fact that Jesus is God and perfect and all those other things, what rhythms did Jesus have that, at least from a human standpoint, made this work out for him? What are some examples of that?
He would rest in the daytime, if need be. He might be praying all night, he might sleep in the boat in the daytime. He didn't feel guilty about taking a nap.
Ooh. Okay.
He made time for his Father to spend time with him.
So how many times, and honestly I don't have it at my fingertips, but how many times did he have this massive event and then leave?
Then he went off by himself. He took a sabbatical. Like some people I know.
So, but he would do that on a regular basis. It was that they had this big, massive event. His disciples, hey, everybody's coming to you. We got this big, massive plan for you, for your mega church. And what did Jesus do?
Came to go to every village.
But before that, what did he do?
He's away. And they go find him.
He got up early in the morning and went spent time with the Father. And finally the disciples are waking up and they're like, hey, where you been? And he's like, well, we gotta go. So he spent time with his Father before taking that next step, which was always, as you said, Phil, is always going to the next village. But he always spent time with the Father before doing that. So look up Psalm 131. I know I've got that one, but I can't remember. My mind just went blank on what that one is.
It says, O Lord, my heart is not lifted up, my eyes are not raised too high. I do not occupy myself with things too great and too marvelous for me, but I have calmed and quieted my soul like a weaned child with its mother, like a weaned child is my soul within me. O Israel, hope in the Lord for this time forth and forevermore. Is that it?
So what's David talking? This is David, by the way. What's David talking about here? So this is the king of Israel. This is ultimately the genealogy, and he's in the
Genealogy.
thank you,
The
Jesus.
lineage of Jesus.
Thank you. Oh, this is recorded. This is great.
It's okay, it's okay.
So this is David. He says he's quieted his soul. He doesn't involve himself with things too great or too wonderful. What does that mean? How does that play out for us today in 2018?
It sounds like don't get stressed.
Easy advice. I mean, there's
Yeah.
lots of posters for that, but truly, how do we execute that? How do we? What is necessary for us to not get
To
stressed?
focus on Jesus.
Okay, and what does that mean? What does that look like? I mean, I'm talking, I want to get down to some actual, what,
And some bolts, practical.
I think part of it is that we need to be worrying about, and worry is probably not the right word, we need to concern ourselves with the controllables, not the uncontrollable. So if I'm not a baptizer and I'm worrying my little head off about that, I can't control it. But if I'm not sharing the gospel, that's something I should go and do. So there's a lot of things that we can't control that we fret about.
I think something that's been helpful for us with rest is having a time carved out that's consistent every week where we don't get around anyone. We just spend time with the family, and that's been helpful for both of us for our marriage. Typically it's on Mondays, but in order to do that, the rest of our week also has to be pretty organized. I mean, every week's the flow can be different, but that's something that's been helpful is just having a disciplined, organized week, so that way on our rest day, we know we've worked really, really hard and we look forward to that rest day. And it's almost like that rest day is like a beacon of hope. When we're exhausted, you know, it's like, okay, it's okay, we can finish strong because we get to rest on Monday. And so that's been something that's been good for our marriage and just for us individually. And so I know that's maybe not, there's some weeks where Carter has to end up working on Mondays, but typically 3 weeks.
But then we were able to do it on another day that week
Yeah.
normally.
That's, for us, it's been really helpful.
cool. So it's interesting that you said that it's after 6 hard days of work, then you have your rest. And you're so exhausted, you're looking forward to that rest. It's because you have worked so hard. Is that what I heard you say? So the one of the things that, as I was doing this study that I saw, was that and I'm nowhere near done with the study, but in several passages, well, first of all, kicking right off, Genesis 2. I don't know how exhausting that was or not, but clearly God was busy for 6 days, and he decided to take the 7th day off, right? And establish that as a rhythm for us. In Matthew 11:28, Matthew 26, Mark 6, and Mark 14, Jesus established this rest. But in each one of those cases, if you look, it was following a period of some really intense ministry, really hard work. It'd be like one of those times when he says, hey, let's get in the boat. We're going to go take some rest. And that was after spending all day, or a couple of days probably, ministering to all these people. And so it was after an intense amount of work. So the one of the things that I wanted to transition into, though, is that as we're resting, and is what are we doing there? I mean, certainly, horizontal sleep is vitally important. Like we read in Psalm 127, it's commanded, it's given to us, it's a gift that we're supposed to take. And so physical rest is vitally important. But we also need to rest in God, and we need to spend that time of abiding. And so as we rest in Him, what does that really mean? What does that look like? And I mean more than just, spend X number of hours a day in Word and prayer. I mean, what does it mean to rest in Him as we hang out with Him?
I think it's being still so we can hear Him.
Okay.
I know one time the Lord told me, it's hard to hug somebody that's running. And He wants to embrace us, and if you're running, He can't really hug you. So.
That's a good illustration.
Yeah, well, I'm a problem child, so He has to talk to me like that. So.
Well, even from the psalm that we read, the child is weaned.
Yeah.
So, the child is not looking for, sustenance, so to speak, but just wants to be in his mom's lap because it's his mom.
I think something that's been helpful, we just learned a couple, 2-3 weeks ago, is I struggle sometimes. We have this decent sized closet, and I sit in my chair, turn the lights off, nothing in there, just trying to talk to Jesus, but I get so distracted constantly, my mind's running 1,000 miles an hour. And this guy named Derek, he was called mindfulness training that he does when he's praying. And he said, we're focused on something and then we get distracted. And then he goes, but it's important that we acknowledge, oh, I'm distracted, and choose to refocus. And so after doing that a few times, I'm sitting there praying, and then I realize I'm thinking about something else. Okay, I recognize I'm thinking of something else. I'm going to purposely refocus my mind on Jesus or whatever he's trying to show me. That's been really helpful for me because, I could sit, it's like when I'm reading a book many times, I'm reading, but like, what did I just read the last 4 pages?
Yeah, I've done that.
But really just recognizing, oh, I'm distracted and choosing to refocus. And a lot of times when I think and refocus, what I'm refocusing on is like Isaiah 6, the vision of the Lord high and lifted up, Revelation 21, thinking about Jesus, or Revelation 5 and Revelation 7, just picturing Jesus exalted, lifted up, sovereign. That's normally what I'm picturing in that moment. And then just asking him to meet me there and speak to me and talk to me about what he wants me to hear. But when I get distracted, having to choose to refocus on that, that's where I normally go back to when I try to refocus.
Okay. And I do want to come back to that, because what I want to ask everybody is some other tools and techniques that you use. But before we do that, let's talk about Moses. So Moses was the chosen beautiful child, right? Put in this little basket, and the Pharaoh's daughter, sister, somebody down in grew up in their life there, and then how old was he when he
About 40-ish.
Okay, so he grew up in a life of luxury for 40 years, and you know the story about how he left and what have you. And then he wandered out in the wilderness for 40 years, taking care of his father-in-law's sheep. I'm leaving out a lot of details. But how did he get, what was the pivotal event there when he got a new mission assignment? What was that?
Burning bush.
Burning bush. What was he doing when the burning bush happened?
He was working.
Tending sheep.
Tending sheep.
Yeah.
So I've never tended sheep before. I've watched some westerns where I've seen cowboys tend cows, and that's about all I've ever seen about that, so that's all I know about that stuff. I'm sure there's little spikes of really difficult times, but it sure looks like there's a lot of time just standing around watching the sheep, right? I mean, is anybody here a shepherd or a cowboy, or does anybody know any that can enlighten us? But to me, there's a lot of period of time there where you're with your own thoughts, because there's generally not too many other people around. You got the sheep or the cows or whatever it is, and you're with your own thoughts. And Moses was in that for 40 years. I mean, I think he had an opportunity to perfect his listening skills with God during that 40-year period. And then so God showed up with a burning bush, right? So Moses, it says, he turned aside to go see this great thing, right? How many times do we, well, first of all, how often are we actually listening well enough that we would actually even see a burning bush if it was there? And then how often do we turn aside when God shows us something? What's it going to take in your life to get to a place where you can hear God and immediately obey and turn aside to that burning bush. Now, if you look at Moses' life, from that 40 years of really learning how to listen, how did God use that? What did he do the next 40 years? Anybody?
Deliver that nation.
Heavy duty
Let it
leadership.
Let God's people.
Okay. And wrote the Bible, or the Pentateuch.
Yeah.
So and what did he get? What did he get to do? He got to go up on the mountain, see God face to face twice, because he came down and broke the things and had to go back up there. So he was up there for 80 days, really. I mean, I don't know how much he ate on that 12 hours he was back down at the bottom, but he was up there for 80 days without eating or drinking. So he actually outdid Jesus there on the eating and drinking.
Regularly, as a man meets with a friend face to face in a tent of meeting.
Yeah. So he got to do things that no other human has gotten to do because of that 40 years. Now, I'm not suggesting you need to go take 40 years off, but what I am suggesting is that you go figure out what you need to do different so you can hear God and obey. It's not just enough to hear, but you also have to obey. I want to tell you a story, because one of the things I've been wrestling with is how do we train people to listen and obey? Still don't really know how to do that. It'd be interesting to get some feedback after this on whether any of this communicated, because this is the very first attempt at this. But how do we train people to listen and obey? And as I've been wrestling with this, I had an event happen, and then I got wake up in the middle of the night with what I think was Jesus explaining, something to me. But I grind my own coffee beans. I'm really not a snob. I just like the ones that come in the beans. And so I was out of the ground stuff. I needed to grind some more, and the bag was gone, so I needed to open a new bag. And sure enough, the bag was being very recalcitrant and just wouldn't open. And after a lot of wrestling, I ripped it open, ruining the bag, but I got my beans, okay? And this is early in the morning, by the way. But as I was pondering this whole scene, that's where I kind of got an idea. And that is that, especially as non-Christians, but if we're honest, we do it today. And that's when we have a problem, and I don't care what the problem is, especially if it's, quote, simple enough, we just solve the problem on our own without any reference to God whatsoever. I mean, I have to admit, not once did I think about God when I was wrestling with that bag of coffee beans. Not once. Went until the next day. I was like, ooh, I think I missed an opportunity here. And so, if we're honest, we don't include God in our day-to-day activities. Now, in the big things, of course we do. We have prayer meetings. We gather the team together. We fast. And that's good. I'm not picking on any of those things. But I think that in our day-to-day life, we need to include God in everything, 24/7. He needs to be, I love the way you pray, Chuck, when you say, we're not going to talk about you, Jesus. We want to talk like you're sitting right there, a part of our group, because he is. So we need to be living our life as if he's, I don't know which chair he's in, but somebody with vision or something. We need to live our life that way. And so I missed a great opportunity to include God in the bean bag opening. But then I got to pondering it down to the next level of listening to God. Now, as a quick aside, we're commanded to pray and give God our request. I mean, look at I always want to say the disciples' prayer, but the Lord's Prayer. where, you know, he says, give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our sins as we forgive others. Lead us not into temptation. Deliver us from evil. These are all requests we're giving to God. And we're commanded to do that. So obviously, when you approach God with these requests, we're being obedient because that's what Jesus said to do. And but I think that, and I haven't completed this study, but I started looking at the interaction between people and Jesus as he was walking the earth. And the times when he would give short answers and basically brush people off was when they came at him with an accusatory tone and they were trying to trap him. I mean, I'm sure you can think of dozens of examples of the Pharisees and et cetera that were trying to do that. But when people came to him with an open-ended question, even the Pharisees, he would take the time to give a good answer. I mean, I like the answer he got, but he would take the time, often in parables, often sometimes just straight answers. But it would always be a paragraph or more, sometimes pages. And so I think that as we're trying to listen to God, I think we need to come to God with open-ended questions. In addition to the other requests, I'm not saying we don't do that second tier. I think we need to add the third tier of open-ended questions. And what I mean by that is that, let's go back to the bag of coffee. Now certainly I could have said, I didn't, but I could have said, Jesus, please open this bag for me. Help me open this bag of coffee. I could have said that. I didn't. The other thing I could have said is, and this could have occurred either before, during, or after, is, okay, Jesus, obviously you're trying to do something in my life. What are you trying to teach me? I mean, this, you know, here it is, 6 a.m. I need my coffee. This bag is not cooperating. I'm going to assume that you love me. That, you know, it says there that if I'm loved, you're going to discipline me, and so you're going to train me. You're going to correct me. You're going to make me more like you. So what is that? How are you teaching me? What is it you're teaching me? What do you want me to learn? How can I get closer to you as a result of this stupid bag of coffee? And or how do you want me to use this example to help anybody else? So those are the type of questions I think that if we will get in the habit of asking God, then we can get in a position to see the burning bush. So, it's a lot less than an hour, but what are your thoughts? How do we put this into practice? What's the feedback here? Like I said, this is the first time even though I've done some studies over the last couple of months, I've not verbalized this outside of Denise. So what do you think?
You know, I think what you say, Bud, is really important, and I've really been learning this over the last 5 months or so since I've been with Mark, and he talks about how when we're discipling any person, how we have a relationship and we're talking to, and that disciple's talking to us, and a lot of times we think discipleship is us delivering content to that disciple. But at the same time, I have a relationship and I'm talking with God, and hopefully I'm talking with God so I can know what I'm supposed to say to that disciple. But he said the most important relationship we're trying to facilitate is that disciple's conversation with God. And so Mark's always talking about when he meets with the people he's discipling and he's doing highs and lows, when they share a low, something he asks is, he says, so have you talked to God about that moment? Or he always asks, how is God on that moment? Or what part of God's character is he trying to show you through that moment? And then waits for their response. And a lot of times they'll acknowledge, well, I hadn't asked him, or I didn't think about it. Or like you said, you know, I didn't think about the coffee bag thing until days later. But something as small as that God's kingdom grows in the mundane if we will look for it and bring him into the conversation. And so I just thought that was something cool that obviously God's trying to teach me right now, because he's saying the same things through you as he said through Mark to me, that it's less of me delivering content to that disciple as much as it is helping the person I'm investing in learn how to hear from God and obey. And that's many more times through questions than it is through content.
To add to that too, stopping if you're in a conversation with someone and say, let's ask God about it. Model it by, okay, ask a simple question. God, what are you trying to show whoever? And just waiting and say, what's coming to your mind? We've done that
That's
before.
good.
And it's like literally just helping them come into the presence of God and space, even if it's just a minute or two.
I remember the first time someone did that to me, and it shocked me.
Yeah, it is. It's like,
Because I was like, and then they were like, what do you hear him saying? And I was like, oh wow, I'm like really listening for God right
yeah.
now.
Yeah. But making that normal,
Yeah.
like if you're a part of a culture where you make that normal, and it doesn't have to be a big, okay, we're sitting down to listen to God. It's, you're modeling it and helping the person learn by doing it there. So
That's good.
I think one of the important things that you touched on was God rested. He doesn't get tired. Why did he rest? And you said he was setting an example, because we do get tired. And Deb and I have noticed there are people that have infinite energy, and they can run like a deer, and Deb and I cannot do that. And so what we discovered over the years is most people cannot do that. And so if we're going to be good disciple makers, we got to model resting. Because if we don't model it, everybody's going to think that we're just the Energizer Bunny and never stop. And then they're going to burn themselves out. So it's not just rest for our sake, it's rest for their sake.
I think without a good plan, you may not get there. You know, Steve Smith talks about, he uses that SWAP acronym, and the W is wait in prayer, and he talks about frequent forays away with the Lord. You know, I mean, I've struggled with the idea of Sabbath for a long time, because I see Jesus came and he fulfilled the law, right? He kind of actually takes everything to a whole new level. And I think that this idea of Sabbath is no longer just a weekly thing. It's a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. And so even developing a plan for that. Okay, what does daily rest in the Lord look like? What does weekly rest in the Lord look like? What does monthly rest in the Lord look like? What is yearly? You know, and so that's been really big for us. And then to put it on the calendar. You know, that's the aim. We will not say we hit it all the time, but daily time alone with the Lord, weekly day of rest, trying to rest, and that's what God's teaching us now, is resting in the right ways. And monthly, like, for me, I get that. Monthly, just Bible journal, me and Jesus, whole day. And then yearly, as for us as a family / couple, like a week. How are we planning to get away? And honestly, even with those great intentions, the years we have not planned it out, doesn't happen. But we plan it, we let other people know it, and they ask us about it, it tends to happen.
I think one of the thoughts that, I can't remember if it was you or somebody else had mentioned along the way, and it was about the prayer time and what have you, that I wanted to share an experience of mine. I came to the realization, and I'm sure everybody already knows this, but it finally hit me about a year ago, that, you know, there's lots of different kinds of prayers. And one of the things that, you know, we emphasize here is praying for oikos, praying for a movement, praying for all these things. And you can find lots of examples in the Bible of those things, so it's commanded, it's modeled, we're supposed to be doing those things. The other kind of prayer, if you will, that I personally discovered was important to me anyway, and that was just hanging out with God. And strangely, one of the times I hear God the most, and this is weird, is when I mow the yard. I got earplugs in and I'm just mowing the yard, and I'm having a great conversation with God. I mean, we're just chilling. Another time that I really enjoy hanging out with God is just on a walk. I mean, I don't go out there with a battle plan. Okay, I'm going to talk to God about A, B, C, D, and we're going to resolve these. I just go walk, and and if things pop into my head that are not glorifying to God, I just remind myself, nope, I'm here to hang out with you, but then just kind of rest, just enjoy chilling. I mean, it's kind of like, can you imagine just being in a boat with Jesus? Or just, I mean, I know not everything was written down for us, but how many times did they just walk down the street together? And certainly there was times when the disciples were arguing about who was the best. But other times they were just hanging out or sitting by the campfire at night or any number of things. So we don't have that today, the opportunity to go sit by the campfire with Jesus, but we do have the opportunity to go hang out with him spiritually. And we got to figure out what that looks like for you. I mean, if it's mowing the yard, do that. If it's in the dark of your closet, then do that. Whatever that looks like, you got to figure out how you are wired to connect with Jesus and make sure you set aside time for that. And then obey whatever he tells you. That's all I got.
Thank you. Thank you, bud. Any last thoughts? So Bud got Sundell, not even Chuck.
That's right, because Chuck, you get a little more credit.
Yeah, you get 20 more hours at least. So thank you, Bud. That was great. Really appreciate that. I think of Exodus 35:2, where God says the punishment for violating the Sabbath is fill in the blank. Death. God is serious about rest. You can get away with fornication before you can get away with violating rest. It's on the same level as adultery, witchcraft, and idolatry. Violating rest. And there's two big reasons, I think, that we tend to not rest. One is because we don't believe that God can do this without us. And we just have to work, because if I'm not in the picture, Jesus, I know you're going to let stuff fall through the cracks. And number two is people pleasing. What will people think if I take time off?